Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Monday, the 2nd of March. I'm Caroline Hepke in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, US President Donald Trump says there'll be no let-up in strikes against Iran as he calls on the country's leaders to capitulate.
Oil prices surge as traders assess the effective closure of a key transit point in the Strait of Hormuz.
Plus, travel chaos spreads across the Middle East. Airlines halt flights as ongoing strikes leave Dubai facing a nightmare scenario.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
US President Donald Trump says the American bombing campaign against Iran will continue until its objectives are achieved. In a video posted on social media, Trump said the US and Israel had struck hundreds of targets in Iran, including Revolutionary Guard facilities and air defences. He also reconfirmed the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and called on the country's leaders to capitulate as he outlined the reasons for the massive military intervention.
We're undertaking this massive operation not merely to ensure security for our own time and place, but for our children and their children, just as our ancestors have done for us many, many years ago. This is the duty and the burden of a free people. These actions are right and they are necessary to ensure that Americans will never have to face a radical, bloodthirsty terrorist regime armed with nuclear weapons and lots of threats.
Trump's comments came as Iran sent waves of missiles at targets in multiple countries that host US military bases. Projectiles struck buildings and killed civilians in Israel, while defences in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain and Kuwait intercepted incoming fire. Trump, who won the presidency by promising not to endanger American troops in the Middle East, also addressed the death of 3 US service members during operations.
As one nation, we grieve for the true American patriots who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, even as we continue the righteous mission for which they gave their lives. We pray for the full recovery of the wounded and send our immense love and eternal gratitude to the families of the fallen. And sadly, there will likely be more before it ends. That's the way it is.
In a brief interview with the New York Times on Sunday, Trump said the assault on Iran could last 4 or 5 weeks. Meanwhile, officials in Tehran yesterday said the death toll in the country was already over 200, with that figure expected to rise significantly.
As the US and Israeli bombing of Iran continues, President Trump has told ABC that his preferred candidates to lead the state were killed in the initial attack. The death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, has thrown the country's future leadership into question. Khamenei did not publicly designate a successor until one is appointed. A council compromising the president and 2 other senior figures is carrying out the leader's duties. Wendy Sherman, former US Deputy Secretary of State, says the Iranian regime will be extremely hard to dislodge.
Iran has many layers. It has succession plans. It will have a new leader. It will not splinter easily. Iran's regime is quite institutionalized. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is quite fierce. And yes, there will be tremendous harm, but let's remember the Iran-Iraq war went on for 8 years. So Iran does not give up easily. It, in fact, has an entire culture of resistance.
Wendy Sherman's words came as it was reported that President Trump has agreed to talk to Iran's new leadership. The Atlantic quotes a conversation with the US president in which he said, "They want to talk and I have agreed to talk, so I will be talking to them," without specifying who he was referring to. Iran's national security chief, Ali Larijani, responded on X to reports that he had reached out to Washington via Oman, saying that the country will not negotiate with the United States.
European countries were not involved with the US strikes and have scrambled to react. The UK has since allowed the US to make use of British military bases for the specific purpose of destroying Iranian missile sites. But Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the UK will not be involved in offensive action.
I want to be very clear. We all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. We were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now. But Iran is pursuing a scorched earth strategy, so we are supporting the collective self-defense of our allies and our people in the region.
The UK Prime Minister added that he had taken international legal advice before backing the move and would publish it. Meanwhile, the European Union called for maximum restraint and warned escalation could lead to unpredictable consequences.
Oil prices have surged as traders assess the effect of the conflict on supplies and transit links through the Strait of Hormuz off Iran's coast. Global benchmark Brent crude is about 7% higher, above $77 a barrel, after earlier rallying by as much as 13% to the highest since January 2025. Mukesh Sadev is chief oil analyst and CEO at X Analysts. He says the response isn't a surprise.
I guess the market has reacted in the right and the measured way, and this was expected. US will take action when Hormuz is Iran-proof. Iran is not blocking the Hormuz because they can't. That's my view, and that's why the oil prices are now is 76.
Mukesh Sadev from X Analysts speaking to Bloomberg earlier this morning. Tanker traffic through the strait, which handles a fifth of the world's oil, has largely stopped. Iranian authorities said yesterday that they had attacked 3 oil vessels, while President Donald Trump said that US forces sank 9 Iranian naval ships. At their monthly meeting, OPEC Plus agreed to increase oil production by 206,000 barrels per day, only slightly higher than the pace agreed at previous meetings.
Ahead of markets opening today, Goldman Sachs is predicting that European natural gas prices could more than double. That's as markets consider the impact of potential disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
About a fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas, mainly from Qatar, goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And according to Goldman Sachs, just a month-long halt to transit through the waterway could see European prices and spot Asian liquefied natural gas surge 130%. However, the impact on US natural gas would likely be limited, according to the bank, given the country's position as a large net exporter of the super-chilled fuel. According to Bloomberg Intelligence, disruption to Qatari liquefied natural gas cargoes via a Hormuz halt or direct impacts to production and export infrastructure in the country could erode about 20% of the global supply. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Travel chaos has extended through the Middle East and beyond, causing major disruptions at some of the world's busiest airports. Carriers across the Persian Gulf are extending an unprecedented blanket flight suspension after Iran targeted airports in its weekend offensive. Bloomberg's aviation and transport reporter Danny Lee says it's not clear when the disruption might end.
We're looking at around thousands of flights a day being cancelled in and out of some of these key transit hubs, particularly Dubai, the world's busiest international airport for transit travel, and that also extends to Abu Dhabi and Doha. So with the region's airspace also being closed, it really means that the airlines cannot operate in the Persian Gulf.
Danny Lee adds that the disruption also extends to flights which would normally pass through the airspace. Tens of thousands of people have been stranded in a region that functions as a global superconnector. The crisis has also hit airline stocks, which have plunged as investors digest the impact of axed flights, airspace closures, and lengthy travel disruptions.
Executives and traders have flocked to the Gulf states in recent years, and now they're reckoning with their proximity to danger. Air defence systems have intercepted projectiles over the skylines of Dubai and Abu Dhabi over the weekend as Iran lashed out at Western allies. In response, the United Arab Emirates has closed its embassy in Tehran and withdrawn its diplomatic mission. Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar has more.
It's Dubai's nightmare scenario. Hundreds of drones and missiles were intercepted by the United Arab Emirates over the weekend as the wider region heads into disruption with no clear end in sight. Global banks are now telling employees in the city to work from home, and supermarkets saw people panic buying. The question is if the crisis pops Dubai's bubble and threatens its emergence as a hub for finance and tourism in the Middle East. In London, Abir Abu Omar, Bloomberg Radio.
So those are our top stories for you this morning. In terms of the market reaction, Brent crude opened in London early this morning by surging 13%. Currently, Brent crude futures up by 7.2%, $78.12 the barrel. We have also seen US stock futures jump this morning. Stock futures slumping 1% for the S&P 500. US stocks 50 futures also down by 1.7%. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index down by 1.6%, given this major conflict in the Middle East. In terms of energy, shipping, defence stocks, they've all jumped higher. Airline and hotel stocks have dropped. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is up by 0.4%, and safe haven assets, including gold and silver, have also surged. Bullion currently is up by 1.9%. And will it also mean a surge in treasuries? 10-year treasury yields this morning at 3.96%, up by 1.5 basis points. Those are the markets.
We have full coverage of developments in the Middle East for you this morning. The latest from the region in just a moment, plus analysis from Bloomberg Economics on what it means for oil markets and economies across the Gulf. But even after the non-stop reporting by our colleagues over this weekend, it's difficult to grapple with how significant a moment this is, not just for the Middle East, but for the world in general. This Monday morning, we have a whole series of unresolved questions, from what happens next in Iran, what it means for the region, for hubs like Dubai, for the reach of US military power, plus all of the global economic effects, oil and gas markets, air travel, shipping routes, and much, much more as well. This has been a really significant weekend.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, President Trump's justifications and goals in Iran remain really quite unclear. He offered a whole number of them in his major address at the weekend. This is also the first time the US and Israel have acted in such a coordinated way, toppling a leader in Iran with air power alone. That's never been done before. What happens now? 92 million people in Iran. What does it mean for the region? China and Russia have condemned the action verbally. What lessons will they be drawing? Many questions that we will try to get to throughout our programming today.
Well, let's bring you up to date now with the developments in the Middle East this morning, as well as look at some of those questions as to what happens next. But first, I wanted to bring you an extract of the interview that Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi did with ABC News, responding to the social media post from the US president saying that Iran should not retaliate. Let's take a listen.
We are defending ourselves, and we have every right, every legitimate right to defend ourselves. What the United States is doing is an act of aggression. What we are doing is the act of self-defense. There are huge differences between these two.
That's Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi speaking there. Let's bring in our head of Middle East, North Africa and Greater Russia coverage, Stuart Livingston-Wallace, for more on this. Stuart, where you are in Dubai, there have been more blasts heard this morning. What is the latest that we're hearing in terms of strikes across the region this morning?
This largely seems to be much the same as we've had the last couple of days. So as you said, we have heard those in Dubai, but there's also been similar in Abu Dhabi, Doha. There's been sirens sounding in Bahrain, sirens sounding in Israel, and attacks going on in Iran. And I'm sure it's not just those countries. It's just we don't necessarily know about the other ones yet. I mean, to give you some flavour of how widespread it's become, Oman had one of its commercial ports attacked yesterday, and by our reckoning, that is now the 10th country that is being simultaneously subject to attacks in one form or another across the region. So, I mean, I think it's pretty much unprecedented. And then on top of that, you had the start of attacks on maritime shipping yesterday, with at least 2, possibly 3 vessels coming under attack at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Now, obviously, that is having a very significant impact on the energy market, but simultaneously, you had Jebel Ali, which is the largest container port in the region, that suspended operations yesterday. So it's not just going to be energy, it's going to be cargo of all sorts as well that is going to have that knock-on effect.
So a widening conflict, but the US president, Israel's prime minister, saying that they will continue strikes against Iran. What is the goal in terms of what President Trump wants to try to achieve, in your view?
I mean, he wants leadership change. I mean, he's made that pretty clear. And sort of from the get-go on Saturday, when he made his first video posting on Truth Social, he said that, look, once this military campaign ends, he wants the Iranian people to rise up and seize control of the government. And that is something that, you know, he said since then. And again, obviously from the Israeli point of view, that's been a long-term goal as regime change. As far as they're concerned, it's been several decades of being the subject of Iranian action. So there's no doubt that is the end game here. Now, whether there might be an alternative path through negotiation, people have been talking about the kind of Venezuela model where the top of the leadership gets taken out, others come in and effectively do what the US wants. Maybe that is an option here too, and I'm sure there are others that haven't been explored yet. So I don't think that is necessarily the only end game here, but that is certainly the one that Trump has been talking about publicly. What do we know about what's going on inside Iran? So a mixed bag. Largely the internet is out. So there have been bits and bobs that are coming out. To give an example, after the death of the Supreme Leader Khamenei on Saturday, on the one hand, we saw videos of people mourning his death. We also saw videos of people celebrating his death. So it's a very mixed picture about what's happening. And of course, it is an enormous country. So to say that we have a comprehensive view of what's happening on the ground would be a folly. I don't think anyone necessarily does. And obviously the expectation, at least from some of the US administration, is that maybe this bombing campaign sparks a resumption of those protests that we saw in December and January. But again, there's been no evidence of that happening so far.
In terms of what is happening with the GCC countries, there have been, waves of Iranian missiles and drone attacks. As you say, that is ongoing today. There has been a ministerial statement out of the GCC saying, affirming the legal right to self-defense. What do you think is emerging from UAE, Qatar, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia in terms of how they proceed?
Very hard to tell. So yes, you're absolutely right. That was in the statement. I don't think that's necessarily a declaration of hostilities. On the other hand, I think they have been quite shocked, I suppose, at the level of what Iran has thrown at them. I have to say that their defences are actually pretty good. There's been several hundred missiles and drones thrown at the UAE, but they seem to be repelling something like 90% of them plus, or that sort of seems to be the estimate. So they are quite effective at knocking them out of the sky. On the other hand, these are countries that are sort of had that international image of being something of a safe haven, certainly insulated from regional hostilities. And so that is a little bit of a shock to the system, I think, particularly for the residents here. But in terms of going forward, I think they, like many others, would like some sort of peaceful resolution of this, because ultimately they know that conflict is really bad for their economic plans and it's really bad for economic prosperity in the region as a whole. So, I suspect they will be pushing again for some sort of diplomatic solution.
Okay, Stuart, for now, thank you. Our head of Middle East, North Africa and Greater Russia coverage, Stuart Livingston-Wallace. And just speaking to the wider regional effects now as well, we've also had reports from the Israeli military of another series of strikes on Lebanon. The AFP news agency says that at least 31 people have been killed in those strikes on southern Lebanon. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Well, now let's turn to the economic consequences of this conflict, the ramification for oil prices and production in the region. Bloomberg Economics' chief emerging markets economist Ziad Daoud joins us now from Dubai. Ziad, good to speak to you. Let's think about oil. OPEC Plus has agreed to raise output moderately. How badly will Iranian oil output be curtailed?
It's too early to tell. I think what we've had it's a remarkable weekend actually in the Middle East, but what we've had on the US-Israeli side, we probably had a maximalist strategy where there were attacks on Iran, a successful attempt to kill the Iranian leadership, and a broad and intense airstrikes on Iran. On Iran, it did retaliate, and it did retaliate in a way that was more than previous conflicts, for example, the June war in 2025. But what didn't happen, or hasn't happened so far, is physical attacks on oil tankers on a wide scale, not in insulated incidents, or an official closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And that is why we've had the increase in oil prices that have gone up from $72 per barrel to $78. And I think that reflects mostly fears of future attacks rather than physical disruption. The war could escalate further, and it could go another level in terms of the escalation ladder if we start seeing attacks on physical oil infrastructure.
On the question of the disruption through the Strait of Hormuz as well, what about the broader effects beyond the oil market? What about trade? What sorts of effects should we be thinking about as ship owners and tankers are essentially stopping their journeys through that choke point?
I think we have to think about it in terms of two ways. What is going from the Middle East to the world is mostly oil, and it's a lot of oil, and it's an oil that's hard to replace. There was mention of the OPEC Plus decision. They've increased output by 0.2% of global supplies. Iran alone produces about 5%. So it's more symbolic than actual replacement of potential losses. So that's what's going from the region to the world. If you get closure of Hormuz, oil is the main sort of channel that impacts that sends the geopolitical escalation in the Middle East to the global economy. When it comes to the region, let's remember a lot of countries in the region import a lot of stuff, including food, and a lot of it might be coming through the Strait of Hormuz. So for the region, it's important because it's what's receiving from the rest of the world in terms of food and in terms of other imports that might also be disrupted through the Strait of Hormuz if there was any disruption through Hormuz.
Yeah, and many of the countries in the Middle East have also seen a boom in business. They've become global flight hubs. We've seen these blanket flight cancellations, thousands of passengers stranded. Again, this is a major shock to the region. What does it mean in terms of the region's global positioning as a transit and business hub?
Well, it depends how long the conflict will last. If you think about historically the Middle East, the Gulf especially, what it provides to the world is primarily energy. And there's a question mark about disruption there. As the economies start to diversify, they've become actually quite big, important logistics hub, both in terms of airports and in terms of ports. These have been disrupted now. And as you said, the business model for the region is to move to other sectors. Now, the question is not the disruption that has happened, and there is some disruption that has happened, but how long that disruption could last for, and whether it can basically cause a lasting damage to the region's sort of business model. As things stand, I think if the conflict lasts for a few days or a week, I don't think the damage would be lasting. But obviously, if it extends beyond that, then there is an issue that goes beyond oil and energy.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.